Coming up on today's Retro Robbins show, we're talking ZX fully loaded. We're talking about the different various ways that games were loaded, and of course there were many different formats. Nowadays we just put an SD card in, the game's instantly there. But back in the day we had to use a tape or one of these, but now we can use one of those. Oh, you just plug an SD card in. But we're going to have a look at the most inventive ways that games were loaded on the Spectrum. So join me for the Retro Robbins show. Okay, start up the super converter. Ooh. Ooh. What do I do with this device? Hello, welcome to the Retro Robbins show with me, Wayne Retro Robbins, and today's show is called ZX Fully Loaded. And what are we talking about today? Well, many computers and a fair few different computers all used tape to load games, but there were other ways. There was the cartridge. There's now the SD card, which you can put into the side to load games, but there was also the micro drive, the floppy disk, and including a CD player. You could even play games off the CD player. And many computers had different ways of loading their software into the memory of the computer. But I don't see any computer as diverse a way of loading as the ZX Spectrum. There were so many different ways that games loaded that they even had their own. They named them speed locks 1, 2, 3 and 4, and even software companies would have their own particular identified way of loading their software. So today, on today's show, we're going to talk about the different ways and the evolution and the entertaining ways that they came up with loading different games into your system. Today's computer of choice, of course, is the Toast Rack, which is the main computer for the job. So, with no doodling about, let's go on with today's first loading sequence, the most popular way that games were loaded. But then they progressed and became more entertaining. So, let's start with this one. The difference with this loading sequence is it loads first of all the basic program, which is the header program, then it will load the screen string, and then it will load the main program. By Ultimate, of course, Jetpack, we all know it's 16K game, doesn't take long. But what's so special about this is towards the end you get to bytes 1, 2 and 3. Don't know what they do. I tried to poke them in the main, but obviously it didn't work. But I tried anyways. But this is the genuinely, without loading it too much, main way that most games, it's just a normal loading sequence. So we're going to move on to the progression of the next loading sequence. And of course, if you, I've got to let it go, haven't I? I've got to let it go to the, to see the colourful effect of the screen itself. Should we zoom in while we got the chance, so as you get a nice clear view of what we're talking about? There we go, that's a decent sized picture, that's all you need, isn't it, really? Jetpack! So, the next game that we're going to talk about, which was a slightly different loading altogether, and it's, you know, we're going to go to this game, and the game is, of course, Commando. So what's so special about the loading sequence of Commando? Well, I'll tell you now. It seems to start ordinarily enough, but then does something quite unique, because you've got the normal blue and yellow of when it's loading, and of course the opposite colour when it's listening to it, but this game goes for a multicoloured effect on the sidebars. So that's a unique, and I know that plenty of games started to use Scooby-Doo, Batty, and many games like this used a colourful loading sequence on the sidebars. Didn't work so much with multi-load fast loading games because the colours seemed to be a bit too much shrunken, but that was unique to itself in its day, and that was quite interesting. We'll let the screen stream come on, so as you can see the logo in full glorious Technicolor. So that was another way of games loading, and of course there wasn't a second. It loaded straight through the basic area of the memory, all the code all the way through till the game actually runs. That was Commando. So we're going to move to a more popular one, and there's a few games that also did this. Before we get into some of the more interesting ones, as I flick through my vast file, and because this won't work in 48K, this type of loading system, we have to go, sorry, 1 to 8K, we have to go to the 48K mode. This was unique to Ultimate, but it did get used a lot by US Gold and games that all loaded like Night Law, I think was Underworld, Bruce Lee, and many others, sorry. And if you listen to that, it's like a pulse on the head pickup, and that was unique in itself, but it's also a hyperload game. Well, it's loading it quite fast, and that was another way that was quite popular. As I forgot what speed lock they called this, but they gave it a speed lock loader name for it. The 1, 2, 3 and 4 they came up with, but yeah, that would load the screen quite fast, as you can see, and then it'll load the main game. So while you're looking at that, we'll move on to the next game that was quite unusual for its time. Just go through my files to find it for you. Oh, this is the one. And what's so special about the next game? Well, I'll show you now. One also that helps to be in 48K mode. I haven't sure if it'll work in the 1 to 8K mode, but nevertheless, this one. When I first saw this, I was amazed. 2 reasons. One, that the computer was, and anyone who knows the game automatically knows what game we're talking about. One, that the computer recognised, ran a program while loading, which was kind of entertaining. But then, secondly, that the sidebars were blacked out. Of course, you had a countdown there, and that virtually counted down to 0. You knew it was loaded. But when I first saw this was quite a unique way of loading, because I'd never seen anything like it before. And I'm just doing a bit of dodgy Retro Robbins camera work, so as you can see what's going on there, the little windows running across the screen. See if I can get the autofocus to work. And that would carry on all the way until the game was loaded, but you know, you sort of try to figure out which man would be at the front. The little white man always goes the fastest there, and each colour various speeds. The 2 green colours go at different speeds, and the 2 blue colours, but it was quite a unique way, an entertaining way of loading. And that was that one. So let's move on to the next loading sequence, which changed things up another level. And quite a number of games use this sequence, of course. So we stopped that and we've started with the next program, and this game was quite unique in itself, because some of the screen data used on the loading screen, which is blacked out at the bottom, is kept for the main program as well, so that you neutralised the bottom part of the screen string area a little bit anyways. But what's so unique about this game? Well, it loaded the screen in reverse. Instead of going from downwards, it floated attributes and totally in reverse. The game you probably recognise straight away is Roller Coaster, and the bit that's at the black at the bottom has got graphics in there ready for the main game, and it just writes little lives and that, it's already there. But as you can see, it's slightly faster than normal load, not quite a hyper load system, it seems to be, you know. But if you notice, it's going, instead of coming down, 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 and then the attributes have come first, and that was quite unique in itself. Roller Coaster sort of, yeah, that changed things up a level. But if you think that was good, and of course we're going to stop this and then show you what happens if you stop. it resets the computer, which is a good feature, because if it's failed, you don't want it frozen, so you have to pull the lead in and out. There. So the next one that we're going to show you, which I found unique, and it's a bit of a game changer, to be fair. A few games use this loading system, and Cobra, I believe, was one. And the first one that I remembered loading was this one, and straight away it puts the Bobby over the program bit, which is easy enough to do using costs when you use save, costs, etc., and use various code and then of course each time you use that, you use a letter of the 8 you're allowed. So what's so special about this? Well, its first bit is to load the hyperload bit, which it loads there to load the main hyperload bit of the program, the screen string and everything else. So as this is loading, oh, my autofocus is playing up, don't worry, it'll come back to normal. It's a long sequence, isn't it? Now on the original game you get a into the, I won't do that impersonation again, but this one gives a long head to pick up, but generally speaking we'll hear it. Blacked out borders, completely loads the screen string in a random type way. Not a random type way, it's sort of done in a pattern type way, but I think Cobra did this, and a number of games use the same sort of this loading method, which I find quite interesting. And it's entertaining because also at the bottom you'll have the text come across and it'll tell you various things, and then obviously you've got the countdown going on, and that was Bobby Bearing. And the other thing was, when this didn't load properly, it would come up error, and that would stay on the screen, because we're going to stop it now in the middle of its loading. As you can see, it's telling you a little bit about the game itself. Edge, and they use this a number of times. I thought the Edge came up with some cracking loading sequences. And there you go, error, rewind, reload. But we're not going to do that. We're going to move on to the next game. Before we get to the most hideous game of all. Not the game itself, but the loading sequence. Yes, the Nightmare of Elm Street of loading sequences. Is this one? Why is this one so good? Well, it's fast. It's really fast. It even says fast flash loader, but it's a fast loader, and anyone who knows the computer inside there knows which game this is. And look how fast, and I think Falcon Patrol had roughly the same sort of speed, and Starbike as well had the same sort of speed. Although Starbike had something in common with Brian Bloodaxe, because they, which we're going to move on to next, had the same sort of loading system from the Edge. Their sort of signature loading system. And the second part changes speed again. Slightly different tone as well, but it made it feel like it was loading fast. In fact, we're already up to 25% loaded, which is pretty damn good. And we're less than a minute in. But enough of that. What happens if we press stop on this one and we get a loading error? It just goes blank. So, moving on to the next one. So the next game we're going to look at is Uridium. And why was this such a special loading sequence? Well, there was a few games Houston did, all used the same sort of loading sequence. And then what it would effectively do, would black out the borders, but so as you didn't think it had gone wrong or anything, it left a little couple of square dots. You see those little red square dots? Once my autofocus works. Come on, autofocus, behave yourself. See there? And they change colour. It goes through the colour sequence and then up to the next colour. And once it's gone through the colour sequence, the screen string will appear. Then it'll do the same with the main program. And it was a clever way of showing you the way the game was loading without actually showing you the borders, but you can hear it, and it's quite a unique system in itself. And I find that quite fascinating. And it's red-white once the loaders, and then obviously they're going to go up a colour, and the red will eventually change colour to and goes up the colour band until it gets to white, which means it's fully loaded. Uridium, Firelord and one or two other games also shared that same loading sequence, which is Hewson's particular brand of loading. So that sort of defined that software house with their own type. There was many software houses that also used their own type of loading for their particular brand of game. And what happens if you'd crash this and it didn't load properly? It would reset itself so you didn't have to in and out the power lead at the back, which we don't have to do nowadays because you can fit them with a switch. So the next one, which we're going to have a look at, remember with its own sort of particular brand of loading, is this one. Why was this one particular? Well, it doesn't seem to have a loading screen itself in the display file, but it would go through the entire loading sequence, dropping different text for you to read. It'll even tell you the instructions on how to play, tell you the backstory. This was the main part. Whether all that text was kept in this part and just kept refreshing on the game as the game got to certain points where it loaded, I don't know. Whether it just loaded the text towards the end of each section, may have done and run from there, which would have explained why it did that. It would probably run randomised from that code to bring that down and then move on to the next code. But reasonably, this used to change text all the way through. So that was quite a fascinating game system, loading way in particular. So we've gone through quite a number of different loaders, but we're going to get to some of my favourites next. We'll let this run till you see the text appear, which can be quite a while. And there it is. So we'll just mute that now because we don't want to see another text come up, do we? So the next loading sequence is an unknown custom loader. It was only used twice as far as I can remember. I know that Jasper was one and the other one was Glass. And why is this so unique? Well, I'm going to show you now. It's quite unique in itself because... Is it playing? I've got it paused. Listen to the way this one loads. It actually changed. You can hear the tone of that head in order to pick up. But then listen to the tone of the head itself. It changes, but it doesn't just change the head tone. Autofocus is playing up again. Searching and loading. And there's and each section, and it goes from 1, 2, 3 to A0, A. You can hear changes in speed. The pickup, the tone that starts the loading sequence, which lets you know which part it is. It's the first of the main blocks, and you can hear the different speeds of each one loads, which is quite entertaining. You had around about 10 blocks to load, which wasn't too bad. And of course you'd have the loading, but then it turned to searching and loading, which didn't need to do that, but loading block 1. And you can hear that. That's quite unique in itself. Blacked out border, but I find that quite fascinating as a loading sequence. And of course if one part failed, it'd say error on block Glass 2. So you could rewind and try and load that block again, which was handy. If there was a particular block that was troublesome in loading, you could adjust the volume and maybe take a bit of bass off or put a bit of treble on and see if you can get it to load, and eventually you could get over that part that wasn't particularly good at picking up on loading. So let's go on to the next game that we found that was quite common. Unfortunately, the game I'm talking about, we're going to go, we'll go for this one because this one was quite a fast one. I remember watching this for the first time thinking, crikey, this was loading fast. It's Jack the Nipper. Now everyone will recognise this was used a number of times. The original game had a short pickup. This one's got a long pickup. But yeah, that's loading the screen pretty quickly, as you can see. Unique. That one allowed you to see the screen string loading. Once it didn't allow you to see the screen string or the data file loading, display file, sorry, loading, were a bit boring. But you know, that one was good because you knew it was working fine. If that started going left or right, or horrible colours started to appear on the once you knew it wasn't loading properly, and you could just stop the tape there and then and just start again. Jack the Nipper. And what happens if you got a loading error? It reset itself, which was bloody handy, if you know what I mean. Blooming handy. So the next one, which was quite used quite often, was this one. Oh, keep playing it but not pausing it. This was quite a regular thing. Oh, sorry. I got to side two straight away. You recognise the way this loads, you recognise the game straight away. Obviously a cracking game. Two different types of the way it loads. Such a long, but what would you get normally after this long sequence is you either had some sort of bleeping sound, different various pitches of bleeps, which you won't pick up on this because obviously this is a TZX file, not the original tape where you had that sound on. And of course what that was, if you actually stopped the original tape when you needed to be listening to that, sometimes the game would crash because it would be listening out for it, and if you couldn't hear it, it would probably crash. The game we're talking about is RoboCop, and we'll go as far as the loading sequence. And of course it changed, the levels would load completely different, but a lot of games, this one not in particular, but a lot of games used to have a countdown number as well. Once the loading screen come down, you'd see it go from 0. I think R-Type was a game that had the countdown clock on it, but it was the same sort of loading system and the way the loads were loaded in block levels. And we'll let it play down to the screen stream before we move on. And of course this particular loading system was synonymous with most Ocean games. They used it an awful lot. But yeah, it was quality. And what happens if you had a loading error here? That just did that. Unfortunately, you had to pull it in and out. But, however, you could, once you needed to load each level on the B side, if it told you there's a loading error, you can rewind it. You could almost see it in the colours. The colours wouldn't be right. Instead of being a blue and that, a dark blue and black, it would come up as a red and black, and you think, oh, that ain't working, so you needed to rewind and load again. So moving on to today's last and most, oh no, we'll go one more. We'll go for something quite unique itself. Was this one, and this one blew me away again. Just like Technician Ted, it did something while it was loading that you didn't think was possible. Joe Blade, oh, I'm going for the 1 to 8K, good, because I've got a 1 to 8K here. So what's so special about this loading game? Well, we know the Commodore could play music while it was loading the game, and usually it did that by utilising the left and right channel on the tape. It listened for the game on that channel, but with the other channel there could record music on it, and it could play music through the television. So as you kind of could listen to when a certain song got to the end before, you know, I think it was the Commodore, it might have been the Amstrad, I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't quote me on that. But we're going to have a game of Pac-Man. Why? this is Joe Blade. But no, it's not actually. It's Joe Blade with a Pac-Man game that you can control while it's loading. How unique was that? And I think Joe Blade 3 had the Space Invader game. But this was... I don't know if you got a special bonus if you completed, but the screen would refresh. It was a little bit clunky on movement, but you know, it's trying to load data and run data at the same time, which is quite remarkable. But I've got to say, this has got to be one of the greatest loading systems ever. Very unique. Excellently done. And it did sort of help pass the time. So why was there so many different variations in the way games load? Why didn't they just stick to one particular format? Well, a lot of the times it was to try and make the games harder to copy. Sometimes it was to be entertaining, and other times it was just to be annoying, which we're going to move on to in a minute. Anyway, the screen didn't refresh like it should do, so I obviously lost too many lives and it wouldn't let me do that. Or maybe it's just a quirk of the 128K version, because the 48K used to redo it. Let's move on to today's last one. Sorry, penultimate one. We've got one more to load first. I think this only works in 48K, I ain't 100% sure. I'm on autofocus, behave yourself. The game we're talking about is a fast loader. I'm going to pause this game because I want you to see the screen share, which you can do. But we'll just break it. We'll go past this first bit, which just pokes it so it's black and you can't see the screen string area. But this time we can see the screen loading, we can see the speed of the loading. And the first bit will be the code is contained in the actual basic program itself. And you get a small head and then straight on to the main program, then a small head pickup and onto the main program. And as you can see, the speed it is loading at is great. Really fast, really colourful, Brian Blood Axe. But what this game did, and I think also one or two other games did, because it needed that code, it had a little bit of basic towards the end, because the code for loading is usually kept at the end of the Spectrum's memory, between the address of 64036 up to 65535. So a lot of the code for the way the games were loaded was kept there. So what you'd actually have in that first header part would be the bit where it loads it and then it runs the code, well, pokes the code into the back of the memory and uses that for the computer to understand, in a way, a sort of early form of compression on the way games are loaded. So obviously when this got to the end, you'd have a little bit at the end which would load over that because it wanted to use that for the game code, which would be in a normal, ordinary way of loading, even if it was headless, but the last bit would just clear that last bit of data. That was Brian Blood Axe. So, moving on to the most hideous Nightmare on Elm Street. Of course, if you broke that, you got load error, and that would tell you to restart it. Nightmare on Elm Street version of loading games. Firebird, why did you do this? It was horrendous. Horrendous? Hideous, even. Horrendous. Got iridium in the back of my mind while I was trying to say hideous at the same time. Strange. And the game we're talking about is, and you'll recognise it, a number of games use this loading system. Unique to Firebird, hopefully, because nobody else wanted to use it. I may be wrong, because if anyone did use it, shame on you. And this could be a whale. Eyeball. Probably the worst way a game ever invented for a game to load, ever. It's called the bleep loader. That first section's fine, but just look how long it takes just to get the screen display on. loaded yet. I'm just going to have 40 rings while this loads just the first part. Yeah, hideous. So slow. Oh, frustrating. So while I tell you that, I just like to thank everyone for watching. While we've got ages. I could tell you everything. I could read you the entire volumes of the encyclopedia in the time it takes to put the screen string on alone. Why? I have sent a Terminator back in time to destroy you. Remember, this was playing in my dreams. I woke up with this playing in my dreams. Was there some subliminal message there? Are we nearly there yet? Terrible, isn't it? The bleep loader. There's plenty of games that use this by Firebird. Okay, there was budget games. Firebird was a budget software house. But that was ridiculous. Honestly. I couldn't wait when I got the multi-face to load this up, press the multi-face and save it from the multi-face, because it loaded a lot quicker. And guess what? I had the multi-face want to wait 0.12 version, which I had a hyperload saving, which I used quite often because I love the game. The game was brilliant. But the good thing about it, if a section or block failed, you could rewind to that block, but you'd have to be really quick on the tape recorder to do that, because you'd probably find that you've got about 6 blocks back and you'd have to go through all them 6 blocks before it got to that block it failed on. So that was the only good advantage of and of course, oh yeah, it's still trying to listen, look. It'll just load, but that was eyeball. So from me, Wayne Retro Robbins, thank you for watching. If you like the program content, and this was an in-depth view on different ways that the variations of the way games are loaded into the Spectrum, some entertaining, some frustrating, some unique, some very inventive. Every software house had their own particular way and style. But yeah, to me that's what made the Spectrum unique amongst computers, because I don't think any other computer had so many different variations in the way games were loaded. In a way, it was entertaining to see some. There were plenty of other types of loading systems, but from me, Wayne Retro Robbins, thank you for watching. If you like the show, please remember to subscribe. That's easy for me to say. From me, Wayne, from now, take care, have a nice working week or weekend, bye bye for now.